Yeah, so I think this is a good place to jump in about our Earth Day plant-based food talk. I think a lot of people realize that eating plant-based is something, at least maybe not all the time, but at least like some of the time, something like every single person can do to help this planet out. And I know like the United Nations has been suggesting more and more people go plant-based. And so I think it's important to look at these big world organizations and try to follow some of their suggestions at least some of the time. So whether you're vegan, vegetarian, or just thinking about eating a little bit more plant-based, we're hoping to help you out with this little happy hour.
Yeah, and we'll see the questions coming in. I'll try to track as many as we can, but definitely if you ask training questions or diet questions, anything like that, we'll try to answer as many as we can. So thanks for tuning in.
Yeah.
This Earth Day Facebook or Instagram live special. And we'll upload it also to YouTube later. I got the camera going about 2 minutes late, but this will also be on YouTube in case you have to go right now or it's a weird time zone for you. So it'll be up on the YouTube on one of our channels or our Sage Running channel.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but we have a couple like things we have to talk about, but I'm going to answer this question. Do you guys ever feel fuel deprived on long runs being plant-based? So I guess my first thought is like, so you're not eating so that's without eating on long runs, or like considering that you are fueling during long runs? I'm assuming it'd be like just considering your overall diet before even heading into long runs. But for me, no, I guess I don't feel like that at all. But I'm always really good about fueling and eating enough calories and enough nutrient-dense foods every single day. And so I generally feel pretty good going into long runs. And then during long runs, depends what I eat for breakfast, but I try to practice race day fueling. But sometimes I'll have a big bowl of oatmeal and I just don't need to fuel for 3+ hours, depending on what I eat. But I always feel really good.
Kind of by default, a whole foods plant-based diet or vegan vegetarian diet is going to be pretty high in carbohydrates and pretty low in fat, especially if it's a whole foods plant-based diet. So, carbs are going to be a major energy source for all sorts of physical activity, distance running, as well as brain power. Your brain likes to use a lot of glucose as well. So you're always amped up on that fuel. And if you're getting enough protein and essential fatty acids, then that's really the building blocks of what a healthy human body generally needs. Of course, there is a slight increase in protein intake for endurance athletes and especially for more strength-based athletes. And I know people probably get into the protein quite a bit. One of the other questions I saw in there is how many, if we track calories and stuff like that. And I know we've done some YouTube videos on like what I eat in a day and break it down.
So when I did my first what I eat in a day video, plant-based, it should be easy to find my YouTube channel. I did count calories, but that was more because I was trying to show that like it wasn't hard for me to eat all my nutrient needs. But otherwise, for athletes, especially female athletes, and I have science-based reasons for this, I don't agree with tracking calories, especially if somebody's little like, maybe like type A with counting calories, where they need this number to hit every single day, and then some people with eating disorders, they might just try to keep getting a little bit lower than that number that they first established. And so with a lot of athletes, that's part of the reason why I don't like calorie counting, and also don't like calorie counting because calorie needs are changing all the time based on what type of workouts you're doing. For women, it also depends on what time of the month it is, and so like, I don't know, if I'm doing like a speed workout and a strength training session one day, like my calorie intake needs to go up a lot, and so I don't know the exact number, so I rather just eat until I'm satisfied.
Yeah, it'll drive you crazy trying to track all the numbers. I've only done it like twice in my whole life, and I did it for my last what I eat in a day video, just to I was interested in how much protein I got, which was quite a bit. I think it was in the 80 or 90 gram range. and I only weigh about 68 kilograms. So it was well over I think it was closer to 1.2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. Of course, the minimum being usually, or most sources would say 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight, but that's if you're a non-athlete. So if you're an athlete and you're running 100 miles a week, 160K a week, needs differ. And like Sandy said, it's an individual thing, as well as differences between men and women and what cycle you are in your training or your health. So it's a moving target, and you don't want to get obsessed with the numbers in terms of like what the scale says every day or how many calories you're eating or not eating every day, because it kind of leads into that extra stress, I think, which is probably not good.
Oh, so I'm going to answer this question about book recommendations. So if you go on the Sage Running website, so just sagerunning.com, we have a plant-powered page. So I have a list of like resources and different books that either I read or we both read on plant-based eating. And I think my favorite, but it's a little bit dense, is probably How Not to Die by Dr. Michael Greger, and he runs nutritionfacts.org, which is a highly suggested website. I also like Proteinaholic by Dr. Garth Davis, and he's also a great person to follow on Instagram because he does an amazing job at discussing new research studies that are coming out, and he kind of breaks down like what this study did right and why the study might be flawed. So he's a great person, and again, he wrote Proteinaholic. But there's a lot of good books out there, and I think that's one of the big things if you're thinking about going plant-based is education is so important. So we'll get back to answering questions, but I had a lot of people kind of ask me about this quote by the American Dietetic Association that I had posted on Instagram and Facebook. And just in case you're from a different country reading this, the American Dietetic Association, all registered dietitians in the U.S. have to go through this association to get accredited. So this is their official statement on plant-based, vegan, and vegetarian diets. It is the position of the American Dietetic Association that appropriately planned vegetarian diets, including total vegetarian or vegan diets, are healthful, nutritionally adequate, and may provide health benefits in the prevention and treatment of certain diseases. Well-planned vegetarian diets are appropriate for individuals during all stages of life cycle, including pregnancy, lactation, infancy, childhood, and adolescence, and for athletes. And so I thought that was a really good statement by them. And also, if you go on the plant-powered resource page on Sage Running, I've listed at least like 20 other organizations that have said something similar. And so, but I want to talk about why you don't, or why many registered dietitians don't even know that the American Dietetic Association said this, or why it's not more promoted that this top organization about dietetics in the U.S. doesn't try to say this more often. And the main thing behind that is just industry funding. So you can go search right now on I think it's National Dairy Council website, and it says something like, "We're a proud sponsor of the American Dietetic Association." And the problem with that is that basically because of this funding, a lot of dietitians, when they're in school, they only see studies by the dairy industry that support dairy. And so that's just a huge problem. And when you actually look into dairy studies not funded by the dairy industry, a lot of them say there's no health benefits, or it's actually detrimental to your health. And there's a great website called Switch for Good, which goes into these studies that aren't funded by the national dairy industry. And so I highly suggest going for Switch for Good and reading up on some of those studies. And for myself, I think giving up dairy was probably one of the top things I've ever done for my health. I've suffered with asthma for a long time and stomach issues. I actually, you came with me before we went totally dairy free. I had tons of stomach issues, and I got all these tests done on my stomach to try to find out why my stomach always hurt. And then within a couple weeks of giving up dairy, my stomach was totally fine, and my asthma got so much better. And now like I've read these studies that all support that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's there's a lot of conflicts of interest, I guess, basically is the bottom line. A lot of money, especially in a country like the U.S. where, there's, government subsidies for some of these things. And, studies on either side will be funded or have conflicts of interest. And that's the whole thing with the scientific approach and looking at real science is the whole idea is to be as objective as possible and to minimize bias and minimize variables that are out of control. And so even with all really good nutrition studies that promote plant-based, whole food plant-based diet, not processed food, highly processed food, is that, it's not always clear cut where it's if you do this, you won't get cancer, you won't get sick, you'll be super strong in this. There's so many variables at play with genetics and lifestyle factors and all these things that it's really impossible to control and definitively prove something. But high correlation could be pretty convincing evidence if the variables were controlled well, especially in a long-term, high-volume study with a high-end number.
Yeah, and I do believe that understanding how research can be flawed is important. So that's why I keep referencing our plant-powered page, but we did give a few examples of how easy it is to manipulate research. So I really think like educating yourself is important. So suggest go checking that out.
What do they say? There's statistics lies and white lies.
Yeah.
So it's how you interpret data or use data. You have to look at the controls and the variables and really dig deep into the scientific research to look at the strength and validity of a study and look at the biases that they might be dealing with. But our plant power page, that's on the sagerunning.com website. So that's what Sandy's references. Lots of links and resources on there. Plant power page, sagerunning.com, you can check it out.
Somebody asked how often we eat plant-based or fake processed meats.
Well, I eat it more often than you do.
Yeah, I rarely ever do, I guess.
Yeah, like when we were going out to restaurants, maybe once a week on average, I would order a Beyond Meat burger, or I like to get Native Foods here in Boulder. Mm-hmm. I like to get the burgers. That's my thing. So probably at least once or twice a week. Less now because we're not going out to eat, obviously, at restaurants, but we have gotten some takeout. But I mean, sometimes we'll get tempeh. We eat a lot of tempeh and tofu. That's just more plain tempeh and tofu. So like a block of tofu that we'll add to a stir fry with a peanut butter sauce, peanut butter soy sauce type of thing. Or just grill it with a tahini sauce. That's always good too. Hot sauce too, like that. Or
yeah, I do like. It's like I want to support Beyond Meat, and what's the other one? Beyond Meat.
Impossible Burger. Someone brought up Boca Burgers there.
But like, I honestly like. It's funny. I'm from the Midwest, which is very like heavy meat based, and I never thought I'd give it up. But then once I did, it's like I really don't even want fake meat anymore. But every now and then, like maybe I'll have something from like Native Foods. They make some fake meats. But it's actually while we're on this topic, something I hear people say quite a bit is that plant-based diets are restrictive. Actually, we should differentiate plant-based between vegan and vegetarian. So vegan and vegetarian, technically those are two types of diets that are based on ethics, where a plant-based diet is actually more about what you eat. So of course, like you could be a junk food vegan, right? But whole foods plant-based, that's much more specific, where you're eating whole grains, veggies, fruits, nuts, seeds, etc. But like we do use it interchangeably quite a bit, but just to clarify.
Well, the vegetarian, you say, like I grew up as an ovo-lacto vegetarian. I was born and raised ovo-lacto. That means I grew up eating eggs and dairy products. But then to go completely vegan, then it means I'm eliminating dairy products, eliminating eggs, and technically it's you'd also eliminate something like honey, and then like Sandy said, some of the lifestyle ethical factors, which I'm not perfect on because I have leather in my car and stuff, is that you would actually avoid animal products or anything that would be seen maybe as exploiting the animals. So we eat honey too, so that's not. Some really strict vegans would not do
it's
that.
Specific honey, like
depends where it's sourced from.
Yeah, like our friends, like they have beehives, and one of the hives didn't make it through the winter, and so they needed to do something with this honey. But anyway, so like I'll ask you a question that, based on something I hear a lot of people say, and like, what do you think about plant-based diets being restrictive, or even just vegan diets or vegetarian diets being restrictive?
Are you asking me that question, or are you asking them that question?
Well, yeah, I'll ask you, or I could go first and give you my thoughts.
You go first.
So whenever someone tells me they think a vegan diet is restrictive, my preferred way of responding is asking them questions. So, you can it'd be something like, well, do you still think vegan diets are restrictive if you consider that you can now find alternatives for every single type of meat out there? Like, we can go to natural grocers and find like 5 different flavors of vegan bacon. You can go to, even like when I went back to my like very standard Midwestern town for Christmas, like they have a whole vegan section now with like at least 4 or 5 different kinds of vegan burgers. And so like from that perspective, do you think it's restrictive? Another question I would consider is that, that's the person who says that probably doesn't eat dogs, they probably don't eat cats, they probably don't eat dolphins, they probably don't eat giraffes. You name it, there's so many animals they don't eat because they associate different things with those animals. And for me, it's the same way with like pigs and cows. Like, I know how smart pigs are. I know that cows are very social and they love being around other cows. And so it's like, from that perspective, do you think it's restrictive, or do you think it's a double standard that like you don't eat dogs or dolphins or whatever, but you think it's restrictive that I don't eat cows or something for the same reason? So I think just considering those perspectives when somebody says that is really important.
Yeah, restrictive. I think it's a relative term, and I think
it's a term people are just comfortable using based on social norms.
I see it as being selective. Some people would say, "Oh no, you're the picky vegan." Like, you travel somewhere international, it's like, "Oh, dude, I want to be the picky person," or like, "Oh, I go to a restaurant and you look on the menu and you're out with other people and they're like, 'What's wrong?' and you're like, 'Oh, I don't know. I have to adapt something.'" No one ever
says what's wrong. Like, any good person like understands.
Well, maybe at this day and age, but international traveling, people, it's a kind of an abstract concept that you would be so selective with your diet. So some people might perceive that as being picky with your diet. And if you go to a restaurant where there's nothing on the menu that is technically vegan, and you're that person that says to the waiter, "Oh, can the chef omit this from this and change this dish?" Sometimes that is perceived kind of as being restrictive, but to me it's being selective. I'm choosing what I eat, and you kind of do have to be more creative, I'd say, with recreating things in the kitchen and cooking sometimes. Like, you start noticing little nuances between the tastes of different vegetables, or appreciating the taste of a salad. I still be like, I don't want a salad as a meal. I want something I want a burger, right? But you start to really, your taste buds almost change, basically. And you get to appreciate the little nuances with, as long as like using different healthy spices, something like, cloves or ginger, garlic, turmeric, things like that are really healthy for you, right? It helps reduce inflammation, things like that.
Yeah, and there's so many vegan or plant-based recipes online now. Just like, I feel like if you search like vegan or plant-based recipes, you'll just find hundreds and hundreds, thousands of different recipes. So
lots of options. Yeah. At this day and age, it's a lot easier. And I think with the restrictive connotation, it has a kind of a negative connotation to it. And it kind of goes back to the psychology of loss aversion. People are worried about what they have to feel like they're giving up, so to speak. So it's like, I love cheese. I grew up eating regular dairy. Cheese is very addictive. I love regular cow's milk cheese. And some of the vegan cheeses are pretty horrible.
But some are really good now.
But I can make a mean mac and cheese using cashews and nut-based stuff. So, it was like the idea of giving up, though. It's the loss aversion type of thing, or the idea that you won't get enough protein, that you might be missing out on something. That scares people more than the idea of, oh no, I'm eating a diet that has more antioxidants, that has more nutrient density per calorie, and I could actually get all these other health benefits. They're worried about what they're missing out on. So I think that kind of ties into the whole restrictive type of diet mindset, or being picky.
Oh yeah, whoever said that, like, about cheese being addicting and why, yeah, I've heard that too. There are like things specifically in cheese that make it addicting. And somebody asked if we could repeat something. Just to let you know, we are filming this on one of Sage's camera as well, so it'll be up on the Sage Running YouTube channel, so you can always go and look back.
On the YouTube, yeah. I started a couple minutes late, but we were just talking about...
I think that was just the intro.
Yeah.
So.
So people had asked about the benefits with the strong immune system.
Well, I definitely think plants are always going to be some of the best ways to build a strong immune system. There are actually a couple of good organizations who have done, plant-based organizations who have done special like posts on immunity and plant-based diets. And one is, I think it's Center for Nutrition Studies. I think if you look that up and immunity, you might be able to find something. Or I know like nutritionfacts.org, they've also done plant-based diets and immunity, so those are probably really good resources to look at, who are very thorough because doctors are actually answering those questions.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with whole foods plant-based diet is that you're getting a ton of antioxidants. You're getting a ton of antioxidants, and if you're eating a lot of fresh fruits and vegetables, it's also very hydrating. So you're staying really hydrated, you're getting tons of minerals and vitamins and things like vitamin C. It's a great antioxidant, as well as like anti-inflammatories. So I think that's probably the biggest immune system sort of boost, as well as having heavily spiced food, if you're having like a curry with a lot of turmeric in it, and
spices are
garlic, a lot of like fresh garlic and onions. Those kinds of things have been associated with strengthening the immune system, as well as not getting bogged down by things that are really maybe super high in fat that are kind of hard to digest, right? It diverts blood flow. So you have really good blood flow as well. It's good for cardiovascular health.
Oh, this is a good question. How do you get adequate amounts of magnesium on a plant-based vegan diet? And so magnesium, you have to remember that pretty much all vitamins and minerals, they either come from the ground or the sun, with the exception of B12, which is why it's always important to supplement B12. So magnesium is very rich in dark leafy greens, and I know there's other like vegetables, maybe like broccoli and stuff, that has it too, but definitely leafy greens are big for
a lot
magnesium.
of legumes, nuts, so cashews and almonds as well. I do take a magnesium supplement every now and then, actually, because you lose a lot.
But that's
sweat.
because you probably don't eat enough leafy greens. Like,
yeah, but it's something I monitor on my athlete blood test as well, magnesium. And regardless of diet, whether you're vegan or not vegan, it's something as an athlete that you want to monitor with iron.
But I'll say, like, I eat a lot of vegetables and leafy greens, and when I did get my magnesium tested, like, it was really high. But I pay attention to that. So, like, if I think of, like, certain nutrients that maybe I need, like, I'll just do a Google search, just like, where can this vitamin or mineral be found in vegan or plant-based options.
And yeah, like Sandy alluded to, it's an all athlete problem, right? You're training really hard, you're in a sport, you're sweating a lot, there's a lot of physical stress. If your diet is not good on any front, in terms of just not hydrating you well enough or not getting enough magnesium or iron, you could get deficient in these things, and it could hurt your health and performance. So you wouldn't know usually, like, you're very healthy, but your running performance kind of goes down first, because that's the fine edge of things.
Again, that can happen on
it could happen on
diet.
any diet, so it's always good to check check your levels every now and then, consult your doctor or a nutritionist.
Yeah.
I have to legally say that, but yeah.
I will say that's one of the struggles of being a vegan athlete, is like, if a vegan athlete gets low on something, it's definitely because of their diet. But I know people who eat all kinds of diets and they get low on stuff all the time, but they don't get any flack for their diet. So I think that's one of the frustrating double standards of being a plant-based diet.
Yeah. And it's, we use a sponsor plug, athlete blood tests, to get really thorough analysis of all these levels, as well as like your red blood cell count and hemoglobin and these things that really could help if you're doing high altitude training and you're training for a peak race. But general health is really the goal. Longevity and general high quality of life, high quality of health.
Yeah. Seeing a comment, this is a good time to remind maybe a few people that I think a plant-based diet can be great for your personal health, but it's the part of the reason we're doing this on Earth Day because it's so important for the global health of this Earth. And I think we see in so many countries right now that, pollution is less and water is getting cleaner in certain areas, and it's really, if we want it to stay like this, it's going to take a combined effort of a lot of good people choosing to do the right thing.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm setting up another camera here because our other camera battery is dying. But yeah, back to Earth Day. I mean, there's a lot of environmental benefits to going more plant-based or eating more vegan, vegetarian at least, just because of the life cycle analysis and the whole process of what it takes to produce, like, for example, a pound of beef. And, it does differ depending on shipping, and people get into the local versus non-local, or, did you fly in an avocado from New Zealand or some out-of-season exotic fruit? And, it's just... If you look at something like beef, and most of the studies, it is very water intensive. The processing of it is very intensive. It's a big process, and there's a lot of meat factories that are getting shut down right now because of the virus, mainly, which it sucks for the people's jobs and people working there.
Yeah, I really feel bad. Like, I know that people depend on that money.
But the distribution of food has kind of been an inefficiency that's been a worldwide problem for a long time. I mean, there's a lot of people dying every day from starvation across the whole world, and then there's been inefficiencies even within a country like the US with food distribution. So it's about getting food out to people in an efficient way, and it's kind of a complex problem. But if you look at life cycle analysis, generally with a piece of land you could grow actually a lot of fruits and vegetables. Even though they're lower in calorie density per gram, you could actually feed a lot of people with smaller amounts of land, especially if you're rotating crops. So it's an interesting thing to see, as well as the CO2 reducing the carbon footprint.
And even digging deeper than that, I've taken the plant-based nutrition course by Nutrition Studies and Cornell Online, actually twice now. And there's a whole section on plant-based eating in the environment, and it's done. This lecture is done with Bruce Munger. At least I think I'm saying his name right. And he's from Cornell University, and this is what he studies for a living. And he just blew my mind away with like everything I didn't even consider when it comes to eating and the climate. Like, one thing is what's it called? Nutrient pollution. And that goes into talking about how, if you're in a coastal town and there's a lot of crops being grown for animals, they're typically heavily fertilized, and then you also have the animal manure, and they're all leaking into the oceans, and just pretty much that's really hurting our oceans and the life that we depend on from there. And that talk just like blew me away, because it's not something we talk about a lot, is nutrient pollution and all these little ways that eating animals is hurting our planet. So if you can, I'd look up Bruce Munger and look up some of his work. He'll just make you consider things that you've never considered before.
I wish I was joking, but an actual serious problem is methane release from cow burps, cow farts, essentially. So I'll get my other camera recording there. Methane is generally pretty toxic in the environment and contributes as a pretty potent greenhouse gas. So methane release from cows burping and farting is a pretty significant thing, actually. It surprises a lot of people. Poor cows, they don't mean to do it.
So I would love to address a topic. We'll get back to questions in a second, but I think with the movie The Game Changers, and just with a lot going on in general social media, we've heard a lot of athletes from bodybuilders to football players to runners being highly successful on a plant-based diet. But we've also heard, or at least I've heard, of some athletes who tried going plant-based and said, I didn't feel good on this diet. So I'd like to talk about some of the reasons why you may hear things like that. So do you want to start, or would you rather have me start?
I know you probably have more to say on this topic, but I guess a lot of it's, I think, sometimes very mental. And, I fall into this trap as well because it'll be like you ate something or you started a big change in your diet, whether it was eating more fiber, less fiber, more nutritional yeast, something. And then all of a sudden, the next day or the next week, you tweak something in your muscles or you just feel different. And you're like, well, my energy's either better or worse because you don't think you're going to stay the same. So it's kind of a mental thing where you're trying to pick apart how your body feels, which is good. It's good for senses, but you might overdo it a little because we're all self-biased. So you're going to think, did these changes really happen overnight? It usually takes several weeks to actually make a pretty big physical change in your body, right? It takes 3 weeks to develop fresh new red blood cells, for example, or to, get really anemic from a lack of iron or something like that. So, changes usually happen over more weeks and months rather than just day to day. Whereas people's energy, it might fluctuate day to day based on if you had a nightmare when you were sleeping that night and you didn't even remember it, or how your quality of sleep could affect your energy levels, your hydration levels could affect it. And I think you're probably going to get into the common kind of mistakes, I guess, that people make when they switch cold turkey to, pun intended, that's not really, cold turkey to a vegan diet overnight. And they'll be like, well, all of a sudden they feel weak or they get injured and they're like, well, I didn't get enough protein or something like that.
Yeah. To build off that, just really quickly, I think one thing to consider is always B12. A lot of people, they transition to plant-based, and the one thing everyone who's going vegan or plant-based, well, some people might say no, but big thing people should be taking is at least B12. We used to be able to get that from like water sources, like rivers, or we used to be able to get from like having a little bit of dirt on our food, but now we're just in this very sanitized world, and obviously we get very sick if we drink from some certain streams or lakes. So we can't get B12 that way anymore. So it's really important to supplement with B12. But I think more important things to mention for athletes, especially for female athletes who are already pretty tiny, a big issue I've seen is them just not eating enough calories. So I've seen this a couple of times, and it's like I'm glad they're going plant-based, but then I'm already concerned from the beginning. So you have to remember, plant-based foods are typically much lower in calories than animal-based foods. So
caloric density.
Caloric
So per gram of lettuce, for example, is 1 calorie,
Yeah, so if you take like 2 different breakfasts, like a breakfast of eggs and bacon and maybe some toast with butter, that's a really calorie dense meal. But you could have a big bowl of oatmeal with like blueberries and bananas, and like it could be a bigger serving size, much bigger serving size, but it could be way less in calories. And so if you're already like a tiny and pretty lean athlete, and you're not considering that, like you have to think about that your calorie density or how many calories you're consuming, that can really make you not feel good, of course. And so that's such a big thing I see with athletes, is just not considering the amount of calories they need to sustain their lifestyle. Because of course, like, you're not going to run or perform well if you're not getting enough food. So if you're a plant-based athlete, you have to either think about eating more or think about adding in, or like thinking about like what plant-based foods are calorie dense. So like nuts, seeds, more foods like tempeh or avocados and things like that. Or maybe you just need to add in like a smoothie along with like your typical meals. Because I think like just following like some people on Instagram, like they went plant-based and they thought like a smoothie bowl was a full lunch. I'm like, no, that is a snack. Especially if like, you're an endurance athlete. So I definitely think that's probably one of the biggest problems.
Yeah,
I'd
just
say.
increasing portion size. You could have a lot of food. Kind of the idea of like if you're eating a salad for a meal. I know it's kind of a pet peeve when you go to some restaurants. They're not, just a general restaurant, and it's like, well, the vegan could get the salad, and
Yeah.
you're like, it better be a really freaking big salad, or it's not gonna fill me up. But you could definitely make a salad a meal. I don't like to do that because I like to eat burgers, but uh, if you're gonna eat a salad as a meal, it's gonna have to be a huge salad, and it's gonna have to
Yeah.
have probably some sort of protein source in it, like tofu, tempeh, some almonds, any
So I
sort of
actually,
nuts, things like that.
yeah, I actually do like salads, but my salad will be like a whole sweet potato and maybe like a whole can of garbanzo beans and then maybe like a turmeric almond dressing. And so like it is a really filling salad.
Yeah, the dressing could really make or break a salad
Yeah.
as well. But extremely hydrating. A lot of chock full of vitamins and minerals. Leafy greens. You're eating a lot of. You're not eating just iceberg lettuce, right? You got dark leafy greens. You
Right.
got arugula. You got spinach. You got, I guess, romaine lettuce even too. So yeah, it could be a mix of that. You could top that with some avocados. Someone had asked about essential fatty acids in regards to. I guess it would be DHA oils and EPA. Essential fatty acids, I do supplement still with a little bit of the Flora Health oil. Not even sponsored by them anymore. It's a pretty good, it's an algae-based source of omega-3
Yeah, I
fatty
will
acids.
supplement with an algae-based one from Univet, but
And it's mainly because that's where the fish would get it from. So people like to promote eating a lot of seafood or fish, mainly because of those omega-3 fatty acids that are essential, especially for brain function, neuromuscular function, things like that. You don't need a lot, but you definitely need some. That's why they're essential. So we do occasionally put a spoonful of that on my salad or in my smoothie or just as a topping. It's kind of like having olive oil. So it's pretty
but
natural.
I still will say that's the one that's still unsure. Like I've heard plant-based doctors go both ways on omega-3s, like debating if what our body can convert and what it can't. So I think, it's something to do if you're playing it safe, but it's not national for a for sure thing yet. There still needs to be more research on that subject. Somebody asked about what's an alternative to iceberg lettuce. I always buy a spring mix. So it's definitely, well, it's basically just a different mix of lettuces, but it's definitely, you can tell right away, like it's definitely darker in color. But yeah, it's just say spring mix on the box, and that's always my go-to. But I would like to touch on a little bit more about why maybe athletes don't feel good on a plant-based diet. And it's part of the reason why we're doing this talk. And it's basically a lack of education. And so, I think there's a lot of smart people, very highly intelligent people that have tried a plant-based diet, but they haven't actually done the research on plant-based diets, or they've just done a little to start with, but then they haven't continued doing some research on it. And I think, even if you just like watch a movie or read one book, that's great. That's going to get you started on the right foot. But unless like you follow certain people or continue your education, it's going to be easy to get influenced by outside sources and start believing myths again. So I do, I think like I love reading and learning, so I'm always reading different books. But if you don't always like doing that, then just follow different plant-based doctors or dietitians. And again, we have a list at sagelearning.com. So I'm really a big believer of having continued education and making sure you're doing your research, because the more research you have, the more knowledge you have, the more confident you're going to feel in how you're eating.
Exactly. Yeah. And it could go with any diet. People have a lot of health problems related maybe to the diet or not. It's hard to differentiate between the two. But regardless of the diet label, standard American diet, paleo, low carb diet, vegan diet, within all those realms, people have health issues, and maybe they get injured when they're running, and then they like to blame the diet when it could have been something else, but we don't know. So it's hard to pick apart things exactly, but realize that the body, the way I see it, is the body needs these essential vitamins and nutrients. The body needs a certain amount of calories. The body needs an essential blend of amino acids, or a blend of essential amino acids. They're the building blocks of protein for muscle synthesis and things like that. the body needs a certain level of vitamin B12. So for ideal health. So all these things, if I could get that from plant-based sources, then I know I'm good. But if you don't eat a balanced diet and you just eat vegan Ben and Jerry's ice cream all the time and vegan waffles and drink beer, then obviously you're not going to be healthy. You could easily gain weight if you're in a calorie surplus, and you're going to start getting deficient on essential things. Likewise, on any sort of diet, you could overdo it. And it's very easy to do. It's very hard to eat the full rainbow and to get in a super balanced diet. That's why you do have to think about it and plan about it regardless of what diet type you have.
Yeah. So somebody asked about how you can do research without a library, and that's actually really easy. That's why we created the Plant Power research page on sagelearning.com. So that's a great place to start. And you can also order books and support your local library, or not local libraries, but local bookstores by ordering books through them online. So, yeah. Oh, then somebody said plant-based or the spring mix salads I was talking about, that sometimes like the plastic, well, it is a lot of plastic, but there are grocery stores, like I know there's a few grocery stores in Boulder where there's bins of this lettuce, so you can bring your own bags, and they have tongs. You can't do that right now with this current state of things, but hopefully when things get better, they'll return to having that option where you could just bag your own spring mix and not use the plastic.
I think some people are worried a little bit about, especially like the romaine lettuce scares and the incubation of something like E. coli or some sort of bacteria that could contaminate fresh salads. You hear these stories, which is a valid concern. A lot of the romaine E. coli was actually from, I think it was from Yuma, Arizona, and a lot of crops, lettuce crops, fresh vegetables, where they actually sprayed it with cow manure, cow feces, water that was contaminated with cows. So that's kind of a pollution runoff type of thing. But if your lettuce isn't washed, you're eating fresh fruit and fresh vegetables that isn't washed off, you definitely could get bacterial infection, get sick from something like that. That being said, if you look at all the cases of E. coli from fast food joints eating beef and meat burgers, or people that get really sick from eating undercooked meat products or chicken or something like that, that's probably a lot higher of a risk and a lot higher of a percentage.
Yeah.
So people will always panic about the box lettuce, and they're like, well, that's full of E. coli, but look at all the cases that have happened even in what is it, Jack in the Box, or some of the fast food joints, or people just cooking raw chicken in their house. You don't want to eat raw chicken, I don't think.
No,
it's not a good
you
idea.
get really sick.
You contaminate other vegetables with like raw chicken juice as well. So a lot of bacteria risk in there. We're just trying to stay healthy. So yeah. Other questions you want to cover on here? I don't know. You've written some stuff down.
I guess one thing I wanted to touch on, I guess going back to what could help people out if they're going plant-based, and that's building a really good support system. And so I think in most major cities now they have vegan or plant-based groups. If that's hard, like even just seeking out a registered dietitian, which I did add plant-based registered dietitians to our resource list on sagelearning.com, just to help build a really solid support system, because I think if you're doing it alone and you live with other people who aren't ready to start eating that way, I think that's it is really hard. And I think we're both lucky that way, where you were raised vegetarian and I became vegetarian when I was basically living alone, and so I could just think through these ideas by myself, and not have all these outside opinions forced on me. And then I did actually, my running partner at the time, he was like this 60-year-old badass runner who used to kick my butt. And he was vegetarian, and he did, there was other people I ran with, but I just remember thinking at that time, this guy's 60 years old or plus, and he's kicking my ass running. And so he's maybe and he's been doing it for such a long time, and he's actually just inducted to the Colorado Hall of Fame along with Kara Goucher, and so this guy was legit, and so that had a very positive influence on me, even more so than a lot of the other runners I was running with. So just that one person helped me out a lot. And then I met Sage, and we have a really good support system, but we also have a relationship where we feel empowered by learning. And I think we're very lucky to have that, because even when I was the one who went dairy free first, and then Sage went. But it took some convincing, and like it took us going back and forth, like looking at different research studies and reading different books for us both to get on the same page. But I think that's a really good thing that we built together, just building a relationship where we feel more empowered by discussing research and learning together.
Yeah, so see a couple more questions. B12, I do take a B12 supplement. I think pretty much all athletes should. I ran with a lot of guys in college and high school or college and at Hanson's Brooks, post-collegiately, professionally, who ate a lot of meat, and they would still get low on things like iron and B12. So that's kind of an all-athlete problem, and you don't want to mess around with B12. You do not want to be low on vitamin B12. It's in things like nutritional yeast, but I go ahead and up it with a supplement just because I don't want to risk being low on B12 ever. And it's one of the few things that it's harder to overdose on. You could take too much, and that's a problem too, but B12 is usually a safer type of thing. So that's the supplement that I would take, as well as those omega-3. You're going to need essential fatty acids at some point, so that's one of the things. There's some other questions. I think someone had said healthy fats. So yeah, getting in those healthy fats and those essential B12, healthy fats. The other thing that we check with athlete blood tests, and I realize this is a luxury to have because some of these tests could be expensive, is something like vitamin D to get your levels checked at least. And so that's another thing. You don't want to be taking something and get too much of it because it could be toxic. Same thing with iron, very toxic if you take too much. So be careful with that. It's better to know your relative levels though. So vitamin D is a big one, especially if you live in an area that doesn't have as much sunshine and you're always covered up with clothing, because it naturally synthesizes through the sun, skin exposure to the sun, but it is also in some fortified foods. But it's worth monitoring because it could affect your bone health and your skin health and your immune system even. So that's another key one, I'd say.
Yeah. All right, more questions. By the way, thank you guys for teaching me about Instagram Live, because I saw some of your comments and I started realizing I could do things I didn't realize I could do. So thank you for that.
Instant Tracker.
Do you mean Inside Tracker?
Maybe. So we are sponsored.
Go ahead.
By Athlete Blood Test, which is probably a competition with something like Inside Tracker. And there'll be more posts on that later. But I'd always, even throughout my whole career, I've always gotten some blood tests, maybe several times a year even, just to check things like my iron levels and B12 levels. And that's just an athlete thing because I'm obsessive with the numbers, but a good general health thing. It's good to get some health checks every now and then just to make sure you're up to snuff and your energy levels correspond with your blood cell counts and things like that.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. Like, if you can do it, if you can't buy one of their expensive tests from like Athlete Blood Tests, and there are alternatives. Like, we used to use Walk-in Lab, and you can do it much cheaper that way. And then the only thing, I won't say it again, with the website mention is I used to follow them on social media, and they did not post very good research-based things, and it was a bit frustrating. And just going back to what we said before, like, it's important to know when you're hearing something that's not actually based on good research.
Yeah, I'm always leery of articles, clickbait things you see on YouTube, like on here on social medias, because
at least
it's better to follow up and do your own research and consult with more experts and see. I've seen the different perspectives, so we're all biased though. I obviously have a bias, self-biased, but I think recognizing the bias is kind of the first step, and that goes with evaluating the results of any specific type of study, realizing that there are a lot of variables at play with your diet, health, nutrition, and how it corresponds to your running performance and longevity and things like that.
And if I know we don't have much time left because it just shuts off after an hour, but if you do feel like you need help, I just added a bunch of registered dietitians, plant-based registered dietitians to our website. So if you feel like you need a little help, like if you can do that, great. If you feel like seeing a dietitian is a little bit expensive, a lot of them do have sliding scale, so it doesn't hurt to ask. So yeah, I just wanted to touch on that.
Exactly.
Right, more questions.
Any more last minute questions here? Got.
We got music videos. I'm really glad people have found this informative, and we really try to do our best with bringing good information that's actually reliable.
Yeah. I guess we were supposed to talk more about the environment and
But we did.
Earth Day stuff.
We did.
We do feel like the diet does kind of tie in with that quite a bit, so I guess that makes... And you're running as well. General health and running. I mean, we're in it with the YouTube and stuff to help promote a healthy lifestyle and hopefully improve your running along the way.
Yeah, so I think we can wrap this up. But yeah, like it really means the world to Sage and I for your continued support. We honestly, like, we couldn't live our lives without you or spread this message without you. So thank you so much for joining. Like, it really is, it means the world to us, and happy Earth Day.
Yeah, and check out Sandy's YouTube channel,
It's
Running
fine.
Wild.
You guys don't have to.
As well as I'm on VO2 Max Productions on the YouTube. We got a lot of training talks, as well as those What I Eat in a Day nutrition videos, but mainly running related content. So thank you so much again. Follow along on the Sage Running YouTube channel, as well as on Twitter, social media. We have a Strava page as well. So thank you again. And
Yeah, happy Earth Day, everybody.
Happy Earth Day.
Thank you.
Yep, take care. All right.